Welcome back, everybody. This is not a Malazan video. This is me rambling about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I finished it last night and I am very much in love with it. So I'll do the usual thing, by which I say I'll do a bit of like a rambling and why you should read it and so forth thing, but that will be spoiler free. And then I'll make a tactical break and then also like put like a time stamp in the description, and then we'll talk about spoilery stuff as well. I really hope I'll get through all of this before the thunderstorm that's been like promised for today hits, because it starts to get windier and I don't know. We'll see. Wish me luck. Anyway, let's get into Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Cheers. All right. Also, this is sort of the start of the month, so I want to take a second to, thank all the Patreon backers, all my patrons. I'll do this like it's like just my general one. I'm just really, really thankful for each and every one of you, and I'll get the individual call-outs and cheers in these non-Malazan videos, because I'm not sure how many of of you backers have already finished like with the Crippled God and will watch those daily updates. So I figured it's more effective to do them in these abstract or non-directly Malazan like read-along things. But this is just a general like I'm hugely appreciative of each and every one of you, and also of each and every one of you who's just watching, obviously. Now, let's get started with Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So I've read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell a while ago. A friend whose a taste in literature outside of Harry Potter I highly respect. Also someone who has a PhD in medieval studies by now, raved about this book and told me that I should definitely check it out, and so I trusted her and I read the book, and I was divided on it. While I absolutely love the prose and the sense of whimsy that kind of adds to that very English feel to the story, I loved all of that. The atmosphere, all of that is great. I just didn't vibe with the story, or at least parts of the story. The actual story was cool, but there was like large parts when Strange is like in the war in, is it Spain or Italy? I keep forgetting, when he's like, I don't know. I felt it was just like too long for some of those things, and yeah, just didn't vibe that much with it. Also, just didn't vibe with the characters. Neither Norrell nor Strange are like people that I felt like any attachment to. So I recognized Susanna Clarke's absolute like mastery of prose. That's obvious, right? But I didn't get the rest of it. I didn't see it as the masterpiece that some people saw it as. But I was obviously intrigued enough to read Piranesi now that it came out. I already had it like in my library for a while. Once again, said friend totally like raved about it, and I figured it's like, the audiobook is not even 7 hours long. I can do this, and also it's a completely different story, which yeah, it was. I loved it. I loved it much more than Strange and Norrell, for a bunch of reasons. I'll try to. I mean, it's one of those books where it's super difficult to make any like even like vague hints at the plot without spoiling anything. So I'll try to not do that. I'll just say it's a first-person narrative with an, I guess, unreliable narrator, which you can judge their unreliability yourself, because you should definitely check out this book. I mean, as I said, it's like, I don't know, 200 pages. What you got to lose, right? In her prose, which is absolutely different from the like more Jane Austen inspired Jane Austen-inspired prose of Strange in Orwell. This is a different one. This one reminded me a lot of Gene Wolfe, whom I adore and think is like one of the most underrated or underhyped, at least, writers of slightly fantastic literature. Now, everyone obviously is always like, "Oh, Gene Wolfe, Book of the New Sun," and they're right. It is like probably his masterwork. But this one gave me some vibes, a bit of something like also The Land Across, which is a weird one, a weird book. A shorter one, which you should also definitely check out because, yeah, weird stuff happening in Eastern Europe, basically. And it also reminded me a bit of things that China Miéville does from time to time. Maybe a bit like City and the City, but also other stuff. And since I also love and really appreciate all the things that China Miéville does in his stories, and with his prose, as I said, I really enjoyed this. The weirdness of it all, this wonderful strangeness, I guess, is a good description. It has a haunted atmosphere. It has a rather abstract approach to a lot of things. And you can certainly read it and understand it on a like wholly allegorical level or on a very direct level. And yeah, it's a haunting story. And I came out of it and I was pretty much floored at the end. I'm like, holy shit, that book was something of an experience, right? It's not just entertainment for like 2 afternoons. No, this is like something that has possibly changed the way I look at things or the way I think or feel about things. And that, yeah, I appreciate that very much because it's not something that happens every day with books I read. So, yeah, if something that does not fall into the very traditional fantasy genre or in the very traditional science fiction genre or any of those like within in like sub genre boundary lines, it doesn't fall into any of that. And if you don't have a problem with that, you appreciate or at least don't hate first-person narratives because I know there's people out there who just don't like a first-person narrative. If both of those things are true for you, and you like big themes and things to think about, then by all means go out and get this book, read it, and start theorizing and talking about things. And then, once you have done that, you can also watch the rest of this video and argue with me in the comments and everything. So this is sort of where you should log off if you are afraid of spoilers, because after this I'll talk a bit about themes and stuff like that and how they affected me. Alright. I hope you've all logged off if you're afraid of spoilers, because that's where we end with this. Alright, I wanna start. There's basically I feel like 2 ways to read the story. To either read it as an allegory for maybe mental illness and someone being lost in their own mind, and different ways of getting out of that. Or you can just read it as basically a science fiction novel with a alternative world where someone just by accident fell into. Both of those, I guess, are valid ways to read it. The imagery does certainly lend itself to that more allegorical reading as a struggle against mental illness or like full-on like memory loss and so forth. I understand that. I feel one way, if you want to go one level deeper in that argument, is obviously there's the idea that Raphael, the policewoman, is actually just like standing for like either therapist or whatever in that regard, probably a therapist. I I had a problem with Raphael. That's a really dumb one. It's a really dumb one because it's obviously Raphael is my full name actually, and reading your name in a first person narrative is odd. It's really odd, especially in the way that she appears in the story here. And yeah, and also since Raphael is not exactly your, most commonly used name in fiction, it was like just really startling and kind of weird to read that. But apart from that, when you look at the name Raphael, and obviously it's her surname, and in my case it's my first name. But what I was looking at here is the weird thing that the name that she's always just called Raphael and never by her first name, and not also not with any like Officer Raphael or Mrs. Raphael or whatever, nothing like just Raphael. So that was the weird bit. So the emphasis is on that name, and when you look at the meaning of the name Raphael, it obviously is an archangel, and the translations kinda is the mix, or like you can roughly translate it as being healed by God, or God has healed, or healing from God, or something like that. My Hebrew is non-existent, basically, but that's where that comes from. So the name Raphael is very much connected to healing. So that's something that you could possibly use as an argument why maybe Raphael is healing Sorensen, Matthew Rose Sorensen, our narrator and protagonist. But I also just liked reading it as a straight up science fiction story, or story about the idea of parallel worlds, the power of like the mind to perceive like the multiverse in a way. That's something that I certainly enjoy. I enjoyed the idea of these like transgressive thinkers and stuff that the I keep forgetting his name. The professor's name, the prophet, was classified as a transgressive thinker, because the idea there is a fascinating one. The idea that and it's something that certainly happened more in like the 60s, 70s, and maybe even early 80s, but not much more after that, because academia has become much more rigid in all these things nowadays. But the idea of experimenting with all kinds of parts of the New Age movement or whatever, with drugs and with rituals and trances and stuff like that. That's something you have in the first half of the 20th century, in like the middle, I guess, sort of the middle of the 20th century. That's a huge thing. It's like not only your Timothy Leary's, but like a lot of other people as well. It's like always been something that I'm like fascinated by in general, because I like obscure and weird shit and conspiracies and stuff like that. It's just something I'm fascinated by. So having that angle on the idea, and having the idea of like, what if one of those weird, almost cult leader like figures was actually right? And if they were right, would that actually make their action justify their actions? Because obviously cult leaders are always despicable people that manipulate and use their power in problematic ways. That's sort of otherwise you're not a proper cult leader if you don't exploit your followers. But if the thing you promised was actually true, would that kind of justify your your actions? And I would say nope, it doesn't. But Piranesi kind of how to say like raises that question, and also raises that question on like two levels, because it's like not only is obviously the professor Arn somethings is obviously a despicable person, human being, but Cataly, the other, is also a even though he was his his follower, and in a way even opposed him from time to time, he was still also a terrible person. He is also a terrible person, which, kind of also comes to that point where you realize that within structures like cult-like structures, whether they be your student fraternity or your actual cult or religion or any other strict hierarchical structure that has a sort of semi-charismatic leader, it's like these structures perpetuate themselves. That's like the huge problem you have there. That's like the huge problem you have there. It's they just happen once you work long enough for a draconic cult leader that exploits you. Once you get the chance to pass on those exploitations, you will do that, or the chances are relatively high that you will do that, I guess. So there's that in there, and as I said, I tend to look at these more societal issues, but that's obviously not all there is in this book. Far from it. So let's look at memory loss, and other things like that. And then we have to look at statues and symbols, and how symbols play a part in our perception of the world, how things, how such things play a part in our world. And the house, how it is described, obviously can be seen as an analog to our mind. You have all these different representations of things. You have the tides that sometimes destroy and damage parts of our minds. You could possibly read those as something like strong emotions. I mean, the association between water and emotions is obviously one that I just didn't come up with. It's something that has been around for ever and ever and ever. So you could read it in that way. There's also the way that he, Piranesi, or Sorensen, or our narrator, thinks of himself and the other and nothing else, because it's at the beginning of the story, when he thinks that they're the only two people that are in the world. And the idea that there's always ourself and the other, and we can obviously look at, is the other only a person? Is just the rest of the universe the other in the way we perceive ourselves and the universe? It's something that I feel I'm not an expert in psychology, but I feel it's a deliberate choice on Clarke's part to call Catterley most of the time just the other. And this is, I feel, important there, that the narrator does something, is a through and through moral person, or a good person, right? While he is in his mind. If that will continue afterwards, is a question that we talk about it. But what happens is that even though he calls him the other, he still tries to be friend with, the friend of the other, to be good to the other, and so forth. And that is something that I feel can be seen as an ideal in a way, because it's something that a lot of us have forgotten, or it has become very much out of fashion to appreciate the other, the rest of the universe, in a way, I guess. So yeah, there's that. Once again, I feel like this idea of the tides in that building. I mean, you can probably even that the tides are the emotions that are in the cellar of the house, and most of the statues and the more rational stuff happening in the middle of it, and you have this weird cloud chambers above. But apart from all of that, I just love the sheer poetry of all of it. these images that Clarke conjures up here are just wonderful, beautiful in a way. And yes, sometimes that place in our mind is just a better place to be, where we can find calm and things actually work the way we want them to work or the way we think they should work. So that, I guess, is the other part of it that just is really important at the end of the story. The idea that since we're talking about, if we want to read it as like his return to the real world, whether that is like after his like illness or like actually coming back into this world, what we're talking about here is that usually we have like flight narratives, people fleeing from some dangerous place and so forth, right? Fleeing from danger, having adventures and so forth. That's like a typical narrative that we have very often. And I feel like what makes this one stand out so much is that no matter how we read the story, is the story of a return after flight, and that flight might have even been justified in a way. So reading it as the brave act that is returning to face all the complications of an outside world, of that messy thing that is the universe and life and everything. That is something that I felt really strongly in a way near the end of the story. Yeah, that I feel is like another thing that I really loved about the book is like how heartwarming the prose is, right? This the amount of kindness that shines through Clarke's prose and Sorensen's narration there is just very heartwarming, and to understand the incredibly brave thing that Piranesi or Sorensen, or however you want to call the person, does by actually returning to the outside world and facing all of that. I feel that bravery comes across extremely well because it's not couched in the usual language of such things. It's not talking about all the glory and all the bravery and all of that. It's just like explain that he has to do that, so he does it, and that I feel is an important aspect of the whole thing that I personally really enjoyed about it. Also, the idea that we have when he talks to Raphael again, the idea that Sorensen is a part of him or is asleep inside him. That idea that we sometimes have different personalities in ourselves, whether those are literally different personalities or just different parts of our lives, different aspects of our lives. The awareness that those, I mean, we have that whole idea that there's like two hearts beating in our breast and stuff like that. Yeah, there's reasons why we have sayings like that, why we have words like, not word, but like sayings like that. That is that for the most part for us as humans, right? Our personalities are not monolithic and uniform. That's not how that works, right? I certainly have more than one facet to my personality. It's like I have a very, very introverted, interested in knowledge, whatever kind of personality on the one hand, but I certainly have another part, and that's a more dare I say Bacchic or Dionysiac kind of personality, where I totally go out and indulge in full on emotional and at least alcohol infused bacchanalia. That's totally also part of myself. And sometimes one of those parts is just safe and asleep in the other part, and being aware of that fact. I feel, can help us understand ourselves a lot more. What else do I want to look at? I feel it's important to look at, to be aware of the fact that in the house, everything is just statues, because statues, being symbols and representations, are also well, petrified. They're frozen. They can't be changed. They can only be broken after that because they're marble statues. And while they may represent different things, we can't change those representations. When you look at that, that is like when you look at a person, at us, how we grow up. A lot of that is how things that we experiences, things that happen in our lives, things that we think, ideas, thoughts, all of these things, they harden out over time when we grow older. And the more they do that, the more difficult it is for us to change them. We can add on to them in a way, or we can destroy them by maybe a large flood or whatever, an emotional flood. But we can. There is no further. There's no like peaceful change possible anymore. Mostly, I would say. Although when you look at that idea of the coral hall with the corals that have spun over the statues, there is obviously that idea to look at that and say, yeah, that sometimes we can hide experiences underneath something else, make them look more beautiful, and take away the harshness of certain experiences. So there's that as well. So yeah, once again, this was quite the ride, and I'm glad I read it finally. I'll certainly go back and reread it at some point. I guess not even that far in the future, because yeah, it's a strangely moving book, and I really appreciate that a lot. So yeah, that's that, I guess. Yeah. So I'll be back in later with a Malazan video, and then we'll see what else will happen in the next couple of days. Until then, cheers.